Every year in the United Kingdom, hundreds of people are prosecuted for offences they did not commit because a detective looked at a piece of footage, made a decision, and stopped looking. The van's GPS recorded my location every 90 seconds. On the afternoon the offence was committed, it placed me 41 miles from the scene, moving along a delivery route I had driven 3 times that week. That data existed from the moment my employer handed over the fleet records. The detective had it for 6 months before my trial began. He never mentioned it to the prosecution. He never mentioned it to my defence. He filed it in a folder and moved on to the next case. And I sat in Crown Court and listened to a barrister describe me as the man in the footage while the folder sat in a filing cabinet 40 minutes away and nobody opened it. That is not a system failure. That is a choice. My van smelled of cardboard and cold coffee. Every morning for 6 years, the same route, the same depots, the same faces at the loading bays. My scanner logged every parcel. My GPS logged every mile. I was the most documented person on the road, and they still got it wrong. The CCTV footage was grainy. 11 seconds of a man in a dark jacket walking quickly past a shop front in a town I had never been to. The jacket was similar to one I owned. The build was similar to mine. The detective pulled my license, found 2 previous fixed penalty notices, both for parking, both paid, and decided I was his man within 48 hours of the footage being recovered. The forensic specialist was a woman called Nadia, digital evidence analyst with the particular quality of someone who treats every file as a question rather than an answer. She reviewed the evidence 4 months before the trial at the request of my solicitor, who had the instinct that something in the prosecution's case did not fit. Nadia asked for the fleet records on her first day. She had her answer by her second. The GPS data was in the disclosure bundle. The disclosure bundle is the collection of evidence the prosecution is required to share with the defence. Everything relevant, whether it helps them or not. The fleet records were listed on page 14 of the index. My solicitor had them. What nobody had done until Nadia was overlay the GPS coordinates against the CCTV timestamp. She did it in 40 minutes on a laptop in a rented office. At 14:32, which is the timestamp on the CCTV footage, my van was stationary at a delivery address in Lichfield. The distance between that address and the shop front in the footage is 41 miles. The offence lasted 11 seconds. There is no version of physics in which I am in both places. The retention anchor is this. The detective knew this. Not because he was clever or because he had done additional analysis. Because the fleet records he had filed without reading contained a summary sheet on the first page showing the vehicle's location at 30-minute intervals throughout the day. 1400 hours. Lichfield. It was the first thing on the page. He had filed the folder without reading the first page. The trial began on a Tuesday in March. I had not driven my van since the charge was brought 9 months earlier. My employer had suspended me without pay pending the outcome, which is standard procedure, and the van sat in the depot car park while I sat at home watching my savings drop by £800 a month. My daughter's school trip to Edinburgh happened during those 9 months. I did not go to the parents' evening in October because I could not face the questions. Those 2 things are specific, and I want you to know them because they are the cost of what happened, and the cost is not abstract. The midpoint of this story is when Nadia's report landed on my solicitor's desk, and he called me at 7 in the evening and said, "We have something." The report was 11 pages. The central finding was 2 paragraphs. The GPS data placed me 41 miles from the scene at the time of the offence. The detective's disclosure summary had referenced the fleet records as reviewed and found no material of relevance to the prosecution case. Nadia's conclusion was that this statement was either incorrect or the records had not been reviewed at the level of detail required to identify the exculpatory data on page 1. Either he had not read it or he had read it and decided it was not relevant. My barrister put Nadia's report to the detective on the second day of the hearing. She asked him to confirm that the fleet records had been reviewed. He confirmed they had. She asked him to confirm that the summary on page 1 showed the vehicle's location at 1400 hours. He said he had reviewed the records in general terms. She put the summary sheet on the screen. She asked him to read the 1400 hours entry. He read it. The courtroom was very quiet. She asked whether, having now read that entry, he accepted that the vehicle was in Lichfield at the time of the offence. He said the investigation had proceeded on the basis of a visual identification from the footage. She said, "I am asking about the GPS data." He said he would need to consider the implications. Consider the implications. The prosecution offered to discontinue on the morning of the third day, not acquittal at trial. Discontinuation, which means the case ends without a verdict. My solicitor advised me to accept. He said a trial acquittal would take another 2 days, and the outcome was not in doubt, but the process had a cost. He meant money. He meant time. He meant my employer, who had told my solicitor informally that a clean discontinuation would allow them to reinstate me without the complications a full trial verdict might create. I accepted. The case was discontinued. The charge was removed from my record. I was back in the van 3 weeks later. I want to be honest with you about what that felt like. Being back in the same van, on the same route, past the same loading bays. The scanner felt different in my hand. Not heavier, just different, like something had changed in the object itself, even though nothing had. The detective was not disciplined. A complaint was filed. The force reviewed it internally and found that the investigation had been conducted within acceptable parameters. The word acceptable is doing a very large amount of work in that sentence. Nadia filed a separate professional concern with the relevant oversight body about the disclosure summary. That process is ongoing. I do not know when it will conclude. I check occasionally and then stop checking because checking does not change the timeline. The bittersweet part is not the outcome. The outcome was as good as it could be. The bittersweet part is the 9 months, the van in the car park, the Edinburgh trip, the October parents' evening. Those are not returned by a discontinuation. They happened in the gap between a detective not reading page 1 and a forensic specialist who did, and that gap had a shape and a weight and a cost that no legal outcome can fully address. What would you have done if Nadia had not asked for the fleet records on her first day? What if my solicitor had not had that instinct? What if I had not been able to afford a second review? Those are not rhetorical questions. They are the questions that keep me checking.